Hello, this is Denny Paul May and Brenda Combs coming to you from the Holler Studios live here at KVEC in Hazard, Kentucky. And we are continuing our series on topics from the IEP guidance document. We have been talking a little bit about acronyms and how those apply to our business. And certainly we're going to be looking at another acronym here that is so important for districts as you move forward, and that's the FAPE acronym, the Free Appropriate Public Education. And FAPE is just that. When you talk about education, you're talking about students with disabilities are afforded the right to have a free, at no cost to the parent, public education that is appropriate for them, that is designed for them that you can see a difference. And so that's certainly what we're talking about here and how we go about making sure and ensuring that we do that. Now there's a little backdrop and a little background information that we need to provide if you haven't. Lots of times in education we rely on or we get caught up in looking at court cases that are around these types of things. So when you're talking about a free appropriate public education, you're talking about delivery of IEP services as one of those parts. And there are a couple court cases that have kind of dominated us with the litigation that's come from that have kind of determined how we're going to provide a free appropriate public education. And in the old days, Brenda and I have been doing this for 3 decades, and so we've kind of been driven by this by the Raleigh case. And the Raleigh case said that when you're providing an IEP for a student with a disability, you only had to provide a minimum floor of opportunity. You only had to provide just a Chevrolet, not a Cadillac. And we used that analogy in our trainings, and we learned that maybe there were some limits to what we had to provide for students with disabilities. And we kind of operated under that for a while. And then the Sixth Circuit, in which we operate here in Kentucky, had some court cases that came along that kind of took that away and said, no, we've got to provide what's appropriate for children to make progress within the general curriculum, and then also how the IEP helps to aid their progress in the general curriculum. So then nationally, people started picking up on what was going on in the Sixth Circuit. And if you talk to Teresa Combs, she will tell you that we were kind of already doing this, but the national scene had some pockets in places where they were not providing this ambitious education, this appropriate education, if you will, to all students with disabilities. So there was a court case that came down, and it was really hinged on a student, Andrew F. Andrew F. was a student that entered programs for disabilities into a school system, into a public school, at the age of 3, like a lot of students do that are autistic. And Andrew F. was autistic, and he was severely autistic in terms of being on the spectrum with the typical behaviors that you see with severely autistic. He was one of those students that ran away. He was one of those students that reacted negatively to maybe the intensity of the light in the room or some noise that may have come up just inadvertently through the day of the school day. And he was one of those students that he would act out, he would call out, he would hit, he would punch, he would do some of these things according to the things that I've read. And so he was one of those students that really needed some behavior modification. But what happened with the school system is they wrote an IEP at age 3, and they continued on with this student and probably gave a lot of support in terms of additional adult supervision and things of that nature. But the IEP never really changed. The IEP never really reviewed the progress or said, is this child making any progress toward making any type of behavioral changes? The functional part of the IEP is so important with students that have these types of behavioral issues. So this school system was guilty of just continuing to copy and paste the same IEP goals, never changing anything behaviorally. So they got themselves into a situation where it came time for the parent to really see the student start growing in size and stature, and they decided to take the student down during the summer to a private institution just down the road. And the private institution, the first thing they did was they put in place a behavioral intervention plan, and they started to see progress with the student. And so his behaviors, his outlandish, serious behaviors, became less in degree. And so we started to see progress in that. And we started to see them then, the parents saying, hey, if it can happen here in the private setting, why can't it happen in the regular school system? And as they reviewed the IEP, some things came up out of that case, and so the big thing was that they continued to do the same thing. The school district that was public continued to do the same thing over and over and over, and so it went all the way to the Supreme Court. And Justice Roberts wrote the majority opinion on this, and he said, and this has stuck with me, a student that receives only a minimum floor of opportunity can be said to receive no education at all. So we have to, when we're designing these programs, we have to think about the student, we have to think about their uniqueness, and we have to design a program that's going to, in fact, be ambitious enough to try to get them to make progress. So, now we have this court case, which really didn't change things a lot in the way we do things, because we're supposed to be writing these appropriate public IEPs for students based on what is right for kids, what's right for students, and what's right for all students. So Brenda's going to talk to you a little bit about the takeaways from this and what it in fact means to have a free, appropriate public education be delivered within your school district.
So one of the takeaways we're looking at the design of the IEP. The template is already made for us. What we have to make sure of as an ARC membership, we have to make sure that we have those pieces in place, what the student needs. Now, the student may need a lot of things, but that's when we have to go into there and we have to prioritize. What does this kid need first in order to get to this? So we need to do some prioritize. Just like in the Andrew case, the child did a behavior intervention plan, which the school system failed to do. So we have to make sure that we have everything in place for that child. So in that IEP, we have to make sure it's appropriate for each individual child. We don't need cookie cutter IEPs. They will get you in trouble, I promise you. So do not do these cookie cutter IEPs because number one, you're going to end up with somebody else's name in an IEP, and that might not sit so well with the parent or the guardian. So you have to make sure that we don't do that. We don't do this copying and pasting. And we have to be more ambitious in light of the child's unique circumstances. We have some students on all spectrums. We have them from the top to the bottom. So we have to look at the whole entire picture. And not only when you're talking about the autistic kids, we're talking about all kids with disabilities. Even though the Andrew case is actually talking about an autistic child, it's just setting that preference for us to make sure that we write these IEPs correctly and that we look at them annually and we revise them according to the progress monitoring. Now, progress monitoring plays a big role in this. That means on every goal that you have to make sure that you are progress monitoring each goal. We don't progress monitor the objectives, but the objectives do lead to the goal. So it's the goal that we are monitoring. We have to make sure that we have data. We have to make sure that as we go through there and we're seeing, is a child making progress or is a child not making progress? When we see that child starting to decrease in the data points, that means we have to do something. We have to either change the strategies or the instruction or interventions or something that we're going to have to do to get that child back up to where the child was and to increase and close the gap. So we have to make sure that progress monitoring is done. And we also have to make sure that when we're completing the IEP, that we're talking to the parents. that we're getting information from the parents. What type of information are we talking about? Number one, we have to include them in creating that IEP. The parent might have a suggestion that they feel like they would like for us to work on, and we need to listen to that consideration. And if possible, we need to try to do that, because the parent has to deal with this child at home. So what we do at school, we try to do at home. So communicating with the parents as much as possible is a vital key to this whole entire thing. Because if we don't communicate to the parents, then it's going to be nothing. It's just going to be what we do at school, and then of course the parents are at home trying to figure out, well, what are they doing with my child, blah blah blah, and then they'll call or whatever. So we have to make sure that we're including the parents in that development, and in the conversation of the IEP and what they feel like their child is needing. And they can tell us more about the child, since that is their child. So we just need to make sure that we do follow and write an appropriate IEP for each individual child. And we do need to make sure that it's ambitious, and we have to make sure that it is for the uniqueness of the child. We need to make sure that progress monitoring is done, and we're going to make a segment on progress monitoring later. So you'll get that piece of the progress monitoring at a later time. And most importantly, include the parents in everything that you do with that child.
Certainly, just to kind of re-emphasize and reiterate what Brenda's saying, when we look at record reviews, we're looking in that section on documentation about the parent, and if the parent has any concerns, we're looking to see, have you asked them open-ended questions? What do you think that your student needs to be working on right now? What does your child need to be doing right now in with this IEP? What's most important for them right now? How do you see it? How are they doing at home? And we ask you to ask those open-ended questions and document it there, so that we, in fact, know exactly what the parent is thinking and what they think should be included in the IEP. And then it also provides us with, the ability or the unique circumstance there to say, hey, we understand. We're empathetic to your situation, and we want to do what's right here. We want to keep in mind that we're talking about a student, we're talking about a human being, and we certainly want to be empathetic when we're considering the things that they need, because that's what we're supposed to be doing when we're working with students with disabilities, and all students, that we're creating that relationship with parents, we're creating that relationship through good teaching with that student, and we certainly want to continue that. And it's hard to argue sometimes. If you do get you do have a difficult ARC meeting where a parent wants something, and maybe it's maybe outside the realms of what you're able to provide, but you can include them some way, and it certainly it allows you to provide a back and forth situation with that parent, so that they feel like they're a part of it. And it's hard to argue with something that you've been a part of designing. So it's very key, I think, in terms of when we're looking at the FAPE, the Free Appropriate Public Education, what exactly is that? It's a well-designed IEP that's unique, ambitious, for the student, that they can make progress. And then how do we show progress? By keeping data, and then making sure that we keep the parent involved. One of the key things they said in the rally, from the rally case to the Andrew case, was the fact that the Andrew parents said they never included us in an IEP development meeting. They always had a draft ahead of time, which there's nothing wrong with having a draft, but you need to make sure that you're asking those open-ended questions so that you get that parent's involvement. Now, I went to, Brenda and I went to attend the National Case Conference in conjunction with the Special Education Directors Conference in Louisville just a couple of weeks ago. And one of the trainings that we attended, we heard this gentleman talking about data and about litigation around IEP development. And he said this, and it stuck with me, and I want to share this with the audience here today. I want you to understand that when he said, if you do not have data around progress monitoring of goals and you go to court, go ahead and write the check and settle. If you do not have progress monitoring data, if you don't have visual representations, if you don't have annual review analysis, then you're going to have to go ahead and write the check. Now, I don't tell you that to scare you. I just tell you that is the reality of what's happening across our country. As we look at these things, we need to be mindful that we do need to have an appropriate IEP that is ambitious and unique to the student. And we do need to have progress monitoring, and we do need to include the parents so that we are doing what we're supposed to be doing. Not because we're trying to stay out of court, but because it's what's right for kids with disabilities, what's right for students with disabilities. One of the things, too, is when we're developing the IEP, we need to make sure that we're writing the goals in measurable terms. We need to make sure that we, in fact, can measure it so that the data is succinct and the data is done with fidelity, and there's relevance to that data, and it helps inform our decisions as we instruct the student, and it helps us to say, yes, they made progress, or no, we need to back up, and we need to look at that and revise that. You know, one of the biggest things that come along, and Brenda can tell you this, and we in our work with Doug Smith, who does behavior here at KVEC, one of the things that come up all the time is we've got this student that's having behavioral difficulties. Well, have you revised the IEP? Have you had another meeting? Well, no. Well, that's what we have to think about. We have to think about, if we're doing what's appropriate, if we see that the student is having these behaviors that are outside the norm, that we go back to the table and we try to revise that situation by providing them with some different strategies, some different techniques in the classroom, and make sure that we're taking data around that. If we've not done that, it's really hard to go from the regular classroom to an institution, if you will, when a student acts out. If you haven't had those steps, those baby steps that you take around that line to say, hey, we've tried this didn't work, now we've tried this, and maybe this is working a little better, or maybe this is not working, we need to try something else. So it's certainly all around that free, appropriate public education delivery for school districts, in that we consider these things and that we make sure that we're doing this annually, we're checking the student, making sure they're making progress, and we've got data to support that, and we've got parent involvement along with that. So that's our program today on free, appropriate public education. Like Brenda said, we are making our way through the IEP guidance document. We're doing these 15 to 20 minute segments on each of these topics, and we have coming up next month, we'll be looking at two very important pieces: the progress monitoring, and also we'll be looking at transition for high school students once they hit those ages of 14 in the 8th grade or age 16. So that's our program for today. We thank you for your time, and we'll see you soon.